Privyet. My name is Happy, and I'd like to welcome you all to my History Reaction channel. Today, we'll be returning to Oversimplified for part 1 of the Russian Revolution. We will be continuing tomorrow with part 2, so be patient, we'll get there. And as always, I will have a link to the original content down in the description below, so I highly encourage you to head over and show Oversimplified some support if you like what he's doing here. Alright, with that said, I have seen this video before a couple years ago, so I vaguely remember bits and pieces of it, but it's been long enough I don't remember the whole thing. I do not consider myself an expert on any of the Russian revolutions in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. There were 3, the 1905 revolution, and then the February Revolution and the October Revolution, both in 1917. But I've had multiple Russian history classes when I was in college, both undergraduate and graduate level. I've written several papers on the February Revolution because my personal area of interest, one of my main areas of interest anyway, has always been natural disasters or natural disaster-like events and their impact on history. And that includes food shortages, famine, that kind of thing. And the February Revolution in particular, there's a lot of food insecurity involved in that one. So I've actually spent a lot of time on that aspect of that part of the revolution. So I'll probably be adding more to that topic than anything else. So don't be surprised. Anyway, as always, I will try to add more context, a little more about Russian culture, Russian history than what's covered in Oversimplified. I do speak a little bit of Russian, not a lot, but a little bit. I have been to Russia, both St. Petersburg, Moscow, city in Siberia, Krasnoyarsk. So I have a little bit of personal experience in Russian history. I've been to some of the landmarks that we're going to be talking about here. Nevsky Prospect, where a lot of these strikes took place. The Church of Christ the Savior on spilled blood, where Alexander II was assassinated. The Winter Palace, where a lot of this takes place. The palace where Rasputin was murdered, or at least where his assassination was begun, I guess, depending on how you look at it, and a few other places besides. So I should be able to contribute a decent amount. I think it's where I'm going with this. And since I'm starting to ramble, let's just go ahead and get into this and have some fun with it.
This video was made possible.
One more thing though. I did prepare a little bit in advance for this. Specifically, I thought it would be fun for both part 1 and part 2 if I shared some direct quotes from diaries and journals or letters or from documents, primary source documents, the period of the revolution, just to kind of add a little bit of detail to this oversimplification.
By NordVPN. Click on the link in the description below to get an amazing 68% off a 2-year plan. Also, commemorating the weirdest romance in history. Get your new character pins and Russian Revolution merch available
Nicholas and
now. Hey Jimmy, it's the 1800s, an exciting time to be alive.
Yeah.
Get out there and explore the world. Gee whiz, Mom, thanks. This place is amazing. Where am I? Why, you're in France, my boy. Here we come up with wacky new ways of running a country. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Whoa, welcome to the United Kingdom. Here we invented the train. Oh, aboard! Holy smokes! You're in a German factory, my friend. Here we harness fire and coal to create all these sexy lederhosen. This is incredible. I can't wait to see where I'll end up next. Where am I? You're in Russia. Have I gone back in time? No, this is just how it is. Are you a farmer? Worse. Technically, my landlord owns me, which makes me a serf.
Okay, we need to kind of clarify that a little. The landlord doesn't, I guess, yeah, the landlord owns a serf, but it's not like slavery in the United States, for example, chattel slavery. The way serfdom worked was the serfs were bound to the land. They could not leave the land, and whoever owned that land owned the people on it. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but I think that's good enough for our purposes here. So basically, the landlord owned them because he owned the land upon which they lived. The serfs could not leave that land. They could not move to a new area, for example. Now, that wasn't always true. Back around the start of the 1600s, serfs could move periodically. They were typically limited to certain holidays. I want to say was it St. George's Day? I could be wrong about that, but there was a certain holidays where they were allowed to, if they wanted to, move to new land. So they could change owners, I guess would be a way to look at it, of their own free will, as long as they did it on the appropriate days. Now, there's a famine from 1601 to 1603 in Russia. Boris Godunov is the Tsar at that time, and because this famine is causing mass migration, there are serfs leaving and moving at times when they weren't supposed to. There were rebellions breaking out. You get some of the very earliest laws that lead to what we think of as serfdom. One of the first ones is that he temporarily restricts them to their land. The moving days are over. You guys must stay where you are. Now, that was a temporary stopgap measure, but it will be made permanent later. I want to say in like 1647, somewhere around there, by the Romanovs. I don't remember which Romanov it was, but it's one of the early members of the Romanov dynasty that cements serfdom and encodes it in law in ways that it hadn't been before. But there had been steps in that direction going back to the time of Troubles, where they were trying to curtail mass movements. So when you fast forward to the 1800s, all the way up until the 1860s is when this is going to change. The serfs are bound to the land. Whoever owned the land owned the people on it, and the people on it could not move, so they were basically trapped. So it's kind of a type of slavery, but it's a different kind of slavery. Anyway, moving on.
I'm scared. You should be, because I haven't eaten in 4 days, and you look pretty tasty. Hey, Jimmy, how are your travels? I hate you! Russia in the 19th century. Feudal, underdeveloped, and stuck in the past. While the rest of Europe had been modernizing and improving their citizens' lives, Russia's rulers were taking a different approach. My lord, we're falling behind the rest of Europe. It's time to industrialize, give the people rights, and share your power. Russian czars had no time for pathetic ideas like liberty and modernization because they were too busy having the time of their lives. While the serfs were breaking their backs in the fields, the czars held all the power, and they didn't have to listen to anyone. Want to run the country like a backwards feudal kingdom while the rest of Europe outpaces you militarily and economically? Go right ahead. Want to keep the people uneducated so they don't get any ideas? There's no one to stop you. Want to keep exporting grain even when there's a massive famine causing hundreds of thousands to die? That is your God-given right.
Now, to be fair, it's hardly Russia. Russia's hardly the only one that ever did that last part. You want to talk about exporting tons of food during a period of crisis famine, just ask the Irish about the middle of the 1800s, 1840s and late 1840s and early 1850s, all about having massive exports of food products while they're starving to death.
While all of this was great for the Tsar, if you were literally anybody else, it probably sucked because Russia was falling behind. If they were to keep up with you, they'd need a strong ruler with some big ideas. Oh look, here comes one now. Hey everyone, it's me, Tsar Alexander II, and I've got some big news. I'm releasing you all from your serfdom. You're all free. Yes! Yep, I'm the best. Oh, there is one thing though. I spoke to your local lords and they weren't happy about losing all their free labor. So as a compromise, you're all gonna have to pay them back a near impossible amount of money for the next 49 years. Expect your lives to barely change.
All right, so this is pretty accurate. Tsar Alexander II emancipates the serfs. I don't remember exactly what year it was. It was shortly before Lincoln does the same thing in the States. So I think it was the early, like 1860, 1861, that he does the emancipation of the serfs. I could be off by a few years, but that's ballpark. And yeah, he frees them on paper. But because they have to pay back the landlords for the land, for the lost labor, all of that, they are trapped in poverty so severe that they really can't, they're stuck. They're stuck working for the same people. Nothing really changes for them whatsoever. They are forced to pay back, like he said, for 49 years. That's a couple of 3 generations or so. And it just doesn't really change anything. And that's not that unusual. I mean, to some degree, the same thing happened in America with the emancipation of the slaves. You had a lot of the freed slaves. They had no place to go. A lot of them went into contract with their former owners to work on their land in exchange for room and board, basically right back into slavery in all but name. You were still dependent on your former owner for a place to live, for food to eat, and you didn't get wages, you just got the room and board in a lot of these contracts, which basically meant you were trapped. It's kind of the same thing as happening here. Eventually, they get all that paid off, but generations of abject poverty, you can't really lift yourself out of that very easy. So they're still essentially trapped in serfdom.
Okay, bye. Now I know what you're thinking. This Tsar Alexander II seems like a pretty cool guy. He's trying to reform the country and get Russia on the right path. Everyone must love this guy, right? Wrong. Why does one man get to decide the fate of everyone in the country? This whole system is dumb. Somebody should do something. Like what? Like kill the Tsar. You're gonna kill the Tsar? Well, me? No. I'm busy. I was kind of hoping you'd do it.
Yeah.
Okay. See? The people love me. They're throwing flowers, confetti, and high-grade explosives.
Oops.
Okay, Nicholas. Your grandfather has a...
Okay, so Tsar Alexander II is assassinated. I believe they threw 2 bombs at him. Well, they threw 1 bomb at him. The second one was more of a suicide bomber. He blew himself up as well as the Tsar. The first one missed. The site where the assassination took place later had a church built over it, the Church of Christ the Savior on spilled blood. The on spilled blood part refers to the site of Alexander II's assassination. It's a beautiful, beautiful church. If you ever get a chance to visit St. Petersburg, that needs to be way at the top of your places to visit. The Winter Palace needs to be there, but also the Church of Christ the Savior on spilled blood. It's just an amazing, amazing church. And it's got this historical significance on top of that.
mild case of being blown up by a terrorist, and he's not looking too hot. So we're gonna go say our goodbyes, okay? No, it'll be too scary for him. Nonsense, it won't be scary at all. We're just gonna say a quick goodbye. Ready? Look at me! The people did this to me! And one day, they'll do it to you! See? Wasn't scary at all. So Alexander II was dead, but luckily, they had another Alexander lying around.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention real quick, the group that killed Alexander II was the People's Will, and they're going to still be around, and we'll get back to them later because that's not going to be the only time they attempt to kill a Tsar. To continue.
Alexander III, and he felt his dad's reforms had weakened the Tsar's authority. Russia was massive, and as a result, had many ethnic minorities. Non-Russians? More interested in their own cultural heritage than in loving me? Isn't it great? So much beautiful culture and diversity in our great nation.
Yeah, and that's something I think a lot of people don't really truly appreciate, is Russia is a very, very culturally diverse country, and religiously diverse for that matter. You can see a lot of the ones listed here. You got some of the native Siberian tribes. You've got remnants of the Mongol Empire throughout. You've got a lot of Muslim groups, especially down in the south, but also even going up into the Urals and so on. You got all these ethnic Ukrainians, Poles, other groups, some Swedes, some Finns. All of it's mixed together. It's a very diverse country. You've got Orthodox Christianity is pretty prominent throughout here, but you've also got the Pale settlement where the Jews are settling. You've got like I said, the Muslims coming up in the south. You've got other groups as well. On top of that, you've also got things like the Volga Deutsch, the Germans that were invited in by Catherine the Great to settle down along the Volga. So, yeah, do not underestimate Russia's diversity.
Alexander thought all these minorities should be a little more Russian, and thereby
Russification.
loyal to him. So he repressed religious minorities. He repressed non-Russians. He introduced the Okhrana, a secret police force that repressed anybody who thought having a Tsar was dumb. If Alexander II was the great reformer, Alexander III was the great repressor. Now that's how you run a country. Hey, Dad? Ugh, great. It's my son Nicholas, who I like to call a girly girl because he's so weak and pathetic. When are you gonna grow up? You still look like a girly girl to me.
Looks
But
just
Dad,
like him.
I grew a beard. Yeah, an ugly girly girl beard. If Nicholas was to one day be Tsar, he needed his dad to teach him how to run the country. But his dad instead suggested that Nicholas go somewhere else. So Nicholas went to Japan, got an edgy dragon tattoo, had his head sliced off by a policeman, and then came home. Now
Okay, we got to expand on that a bit. That is true. He did go to Japan, and there was an assassination attempt against him while he was in Japan. He did get a cut along his scalp from an attack by a Japanese assassin. He was protected by his cousin, I want to say Prince or King of Greece. I can't remember exactly who it was. I know it was a cousin. I'm pretty sure he was a high-ranking nobleman from Greece.
Will you teach me how to rule? I suppose it's time. Okay, there's a lot you need to know before becoming what? I've got kidney inflammation. Oh no! Upon his father's death, a totally unprepared Nicholas II ascended to the Russian throne. He wasn't a reformer like his grandfather, nor was he a repressor like his dad. Nicholas was Nicholas. Timid, easily swayed, and more interested in doing whatever the hell this is. Or this. Or this. He wasn't ready to rule.
I got a question.
Saying, I'm not yet ready to be czar. I know nothing of the business of ruling.
And he did say that.
Time to bring it up. However, Nicholas firmly believed that he was chosen by God to be Russia's big daddy. And while he doubted his ability to rule, he was going to give it his best shot. And hey, who knows? Maybe he wouldn't be so bad after all.
So Nicholas wasn't the only one that would have believed that. A bulk of the Russian people also would have believed that he was the chosen of God. That's just how the czars worked.
To get things off to a good start, Nicholas promised free pretzels and beer to a huge crowd in Moscow to celebrate his coronation. So enticing a proposition to
start. Oh, hey, I see Waldo. See if you can see my mouse button. There he is. I finally found him.
Peasants that the ensuing stampede left nearly 1,500 people dead.
Yeah.
What the hell happened? We're not sure, but you're scheduled to go party with the French at 8 o'clock. Shouldn't I stay here out of respect for the people? When have Russian czars ever respected the people? Nicholas's decision to go party with the French immediately tarnished his image. Some were calling him Nicholas the Bloody. The czars had been partying hard at the expense of the people for long enough. They'd emancipated the serfs, but failed to lift them out of poverty. They used their secret police to crack down on anyone who might criticize them, and they'd failed to modernize and give the people rights, something the rest of Europe had begun doing over a century ago. The rule of the czars was quickly becoming outdated, and more Russians began wondering if there was a better way. For many, the solution was simple. Just look to the West. Republics, democracies, and constitutional monarchies galore. But a small growing group rejected that for an even better idea, a little something they called communism. Take Vladimir Lenin, an intelligent member of Russia's middle class.
To be fair, a lot of them were more interested in socialism. There was a huge Marxist movement too, don't get me wrong. But there were a lot more moderate people as well who were just interested in some form of socialism.
And also, a massive ill-tempered jerk. If you disagreed with him about anything, he wasn't afraid to call you out. You fat-headed, simple-minded, vapid, cockeyed imbecile! Tenderheart Bear is a far superior Care Bear to Bedtime Bear! And he was no stranger to political unrest either. His older brother was executed for plotting to kill the Tsar, and Lenin himself was...
Not only his older brother, his brother Alexander was part of the People's Will, a group that assassinated Tsar Alexander II, and at this period of time, the People's Will were now planning on having their terrorist branch, which Lenin's brother Alexander was part of, have them assassinate Alexander III. They got caught. Brother Alexander, there's so many Alexanders in this story, I'm trying to be specific, was executed. But also, Lenin's sister Anna, I believe it was Anna, was also a revolutionary. She was arrested and exiled. The younger sister, Maria, was also arrested, but she didn't have any serious long-term punishment. I believe she may have spent some time in prison, but only briefly. It was Anna and Alexander that got hit the hardest, Alexander being the one executed. So Lenin comes from a revolutionary family. Pretty much he and all his siblings, or at least most of his siblings, were all revolutionaries. I think the execution of Alexander really pushed Vladimir Lenin to try harder. Their family name was not Lenin, in case you didn't know that, it was Ulyanov. He changes his name later. And yeah, and they said he was an ill-tempered jerk. That needs a little context. Lenin's personality is something that has been debated for over a century now, people have been debating what kind of person Lenin is for a very long time now. And there's never been a lot of agreement on that. Depending on who you're asking, get radically different stories. One thing you can pretty much say about Lenin, though, was that he was a revolutionary. And by that, I mean he ate, drank, and breathed revolution. He was absolutely obsessed about it. You could almost say he was obsessive compulsive when it came towards following his revolutionary ideals. He was known to be brutal in debates. He could be very sarcastic in debates and totally uncompromising in debates. Now, in practice, he could be compromising. And so when you hear him described as uncompromising, that depends on the context. Like I said, in debate, he never compromised. He believed what he believed, and if you didn't agree with him, you were an idiot. There's no question about that from his perspective. But he could compromise if he felt that compromise furthered his revolution. So let's kind of understand there is some nuance there. Will he compromise on his ideals? No. Will he compromise in a political debate? No. Will he compromise if he thinks that's something that's going to further his revolutionary agenda? Absolutely he will. He will do whatever is most expedient to advance his revolutionary ideals. That is who Lenin was. So kind of have to keep that in mind when we're talking about him. The way he behaved in debates is not necessarily how he would behave in how he addressed political concerns in practical sense, and how he might have interacted on a personal level. He was, by all accounts that I've ever read anyway, much more of an intellectual than he was an empathetic individual. In other words, he put rational thought and reasoning above empathy, so he could come across as cruel and unfeeling pretty easily because of that. Like I said, he was obsessed with his revolution, and if a bunch of people needed to die in order for his revolution to achieve what he wanted it to achieve, then that was the price that had to be paid. However, again, everything I've read suggests that he sincerely wanted to make Russia better for the Russian people. But that's from his own perspective. Better by his definition of better. And like I said, he was more than willing to let people die for the greater good, as he saw it. So, Lenin, there's a lot of nuance to his personality and his character. And I think that's why there is so much debate, because too many people want to make it all one thing or all the other. Either he's the idealized saint who has saved Russia from the cruel czars, or he's the evil dictator that was cruel and mean on everything he did. And a lot of people don't want to get anywhere other than those extremes. And nobody, well, I wouldn't say nobody, it's theoretically possible, but people generally aren't extremes. There's crossover. In Lenin's case, I think he genuinely cared about the Russian people, but he was willing to go through some pretty extreme means in order to get where he thought they should be. And whether he was right about where they should be or not is very definitely debatable. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Lenin is not as simple as all one thing or all the other. He could be uncompromising, especially in debate. He could be certainly cruel and demeaning. He was known to be extremely sarcastic in debate. But in other matters, he could be compromising if that furthered his revolution. I said enough about that. I just wanted to make that clear.
Expelled from university for participating in a student protest. But how did Lenin go from being a middle-class nerd to the arbiter of socialist divinity? Well, to tell that story, we first need to go back a few decades to when a man named Karl Marx wrote a manifesto explaining how capitalism is a system whereby the stinky bourgeoisie oppressed and exploited the working masses, and that only through class warfare could the workers rise up and instate a communist utopia. Now go back forward a few decades to Lenin reading that manifesto and loving it.
He did.
Publicly admitting you loved Marx and not Russia's big daddy would get you the cruelest punishment imaginable. Exile to Siberia. Enjoy exile, where you'll live with your wife, chill around town, and secretly write socialist newspapers. Hey, that doesn't sound so bad.
What he was already doing.
Is going to live with you.
Okay, that is not really that accurate. First of all, he did not get exiled to Siberia with his wife. His wife was Nadezhda, most oftenly referred to as Nadia. His mother-in-law was Elizabeth. But when he was exiled to Siberia, he wasn't married yet. He was engaged to Nadezhda. Excuse me, I keep trying to put an extra Z in there. And we'll just call her Nadia for simplicity's sake. That's very likely why the mother-in-law initially went with them. Elizaveta was to ensure that they got married before they started let's just say she wanted to make sure that they were not living in sin, so to speak. Elizaveta was extremely religious. She was extremely conservative in that regard. That a lot of the stuff that I've read, that was one of her primary reasons for going with Lenin and Nadia. However, this idea that Lenin found that distressful is not accurate. From everything I've read, he liked his mother-in-law. In fact, his wife, they do marry while he's exiled in Siberia. They married there. So he lived with his wife in exile, but they weren't married when they were exiled. From everything I've read, his wife and his mother-in-law supported his revolution. They worked for the revolution. And Lenin was all about the revolution. So I'm sure he put revolution first, family second in this case. But everything I've read said he got along just fine with Elizaveta, and he didn't really have any issues with her being there. He probably appreciated it because it gave him help on his plans and plotting.
And finished his stint in Siberia, he left Russia for Europe, where he was free to hang out with other Russian Marxists and talk about how great communism was. Now today, you might hear the word communism and think of this. But that's not how intellectuals living under a tough czarist regime saw it. To them, communism promised a land where all were equal, where workers weren't exploited, and even people...
That's a Tiger King, isn't it? That's a weird thing to put in there. Yeah, you've got to remember, communism, at least on a scale like Russia's doing, has never been tried before. Something like communism has been around for a long, long time. If you look at very small villages, for example, especially in, say, a feudal period, where a lot of these little villages shared everything communally, or especially hunter-gatherer groups tended to be communal, but you don't see it on a national scale like you're going to see here in Russia. This is new. This is uncharted territory. Nobody knows what it's going to be like.
Like you could get a girlfriend. So Lenin joined a party of Russian communists living in Europe, and he founded a communist newsletter that was smuggled into Russia to try to radicalize the people. However, not everyone in the Socialist Party agreed with Lenin. In fact, they disagreed with him on a lot of issues, and Lenin was so uncompromising that he caused a split in the party. During one conference, a heated debate broke out, and Lenin was unwilling to give an inch. You pig-ignorant, half-witted, fatuous morons! Cereal is a soup! Listen, Lenin, you're a smart guy, but you have no idea what you're talking about. We're out of here. All in favor of cereal being a soup? Hey, would you look at that? We're in the majority. So Lenin set up his own faction within the party he called the Majority, or Bolshevik if you're speaking Russian.
Yep.
And the other faction became known as the Minority, or Menshevik. And oddly, the majority were often in the minority, and the minority in the majority.
Yeah, this was brilliant on Lenin's part. What he does is, even though when this party fractures, the Socialist Party fractures, he renames his faction the Bolsheviks, from Bolshaya, large, great. So he's basically naming his party the Majority. Whereas he gives the other faction a new name. He calls them the Mensheviks, which is literally the minority. Even though the minority outnumbers the Bolsheviks by quite a bit at this early period. It's a great marketing ploy, if you want to look at it that way. It's great propaganda. When you're out there, listening to politicians, who are you going to listen to, the majority or the minority? It's a brilliant ploy by Lenin. Really good branding.
Or Menshevik. And oddly, the majority were often in the minority, and the minority in the majority. The Mensheviks were less radical, whereas Lenin wanted the Bolsheviks to be loyal to him and his uncompromising ideas. And if you weren't loyal, well then you're gonna get a big brain beatdown. Mensheviks worried that Lenin's attitude could lead to a one-man dictatorship. But come on, does this guy look like a dictator to you? For now, Lenin remained in Europe, writing his socialist newspaper and impatiently awaiting an opportunity to overthrow the Tsar and bring communist utopia to Russia. Cool. A free hat? Who the heck are you? I'm definitely not a Russian secret police officer spying on Marxists. Oh crap, I don't want secret police watching me. Then you, my friend, should use NordVPN.
All right, ad time. I'm going to skip over this real quick. Normally I let ad play if it's a fairly recent video. This is not. Any promos or anything like that that's involved in this no longer apply, so let's just fast forward past this. All right, I think we're back.
Now where was I? Oh yeah, a timid, easily swayed Tsar, a massive ill-tempered jerk, impatiently awaiting a communist revolution. And revolution was coming, but not in the way Lenin thought. Back in
Nope.
St. Petersburg, one of the Tsar's most skilled and influential advisors knew the country finally needed to catch up with the rest of Europe. Hey Nick, we really got to industrialize, get more factories, and make some, I don't know, textiles or something. Won't that change the social fabric of Russia? Maybe. Hey, isn't it past your bedtime? But I haven't had my milk and snuggles yet. Will you snuggle me? Nicholas thought modernization was boring, but he let Sergei do his thing. And do his thing he did. He borrowed some money and got Russia some sexy factories. And you know what sexy factories means.
Batyushka dolls. Actually got one in a display cabinet here behind me. I got mine in Red Square. Anyway, yeah, factory work at this time was extremely dangerous. It could be anyway. There was very little along the lines of safety regulations in the 19th century. You'll start seeing some develop during this period, but it's going to be much later into the 20th century before you start getting serious work reform around the world. I'm not talking specifically about Russia here. England, United States, Germany, it's all the same. There's not a lot of safety standards, a lot of workplace accidents, a lot of the work hours were 12 or more hours a day for very, very low wages. It could be grueling and exhausting and pretty thankless work and extremely dangerous. So, yeah, not an ideal situation. It's the breeding ground for dissent, and it was in Europe, and all over Europe. Earlier than this, in the earlier stages of the Industrial Revolution over there, but it's just now getting to Russia. So they're just now getting to learn some of these things for themselves. And they've actually got a little bit of an advantage because this has all been done before, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're paying attention and learning from the mistakes of some of these other countries.
Conditions were terrible, but this growing working class wasn't about to take it lying down. They started to do what workers do best: strike. Despite Sergei's efforts, people in Russia still weren't happy. Peasants were still poor, liberals still wanted reform, and now the workers wanted better working conditions. And the problem with being an autocrat is that when everyone's unhappy, there's only one person to blame: you.
That is not accurate in the case of Russia. I was going to save this for a little later, but let's just talk about this right now. One of the big things about Russia during this period and prior to this period is the idea of the Batyushka Tsar, the little father. The Tsar is chosen by God, and they literally called him the Batyushka, the little father. He was seen as a father figure, as a protector of the country, as the father of his children, with the Russian people being his children. Now, there was a saying, and it's Tsar Horoshi Boyarsi Plokaya, which is basically the Tsar is good, but the boyars are bad. And what that was referring to was this idea that if there were problems, if something was wrong in the country, it wasn't the Tsar's fault. It was the fault of the people under the Tsar, the boyars or other nobles, the landlord that own these serfs. They're the problem, not the Tsar. These middlemen, if you want to call it, the middle managers are the problem. If only you can get to your Batyushka, your little father, and tell him your problems, he'll fix them. You just have to bypass that middle layer. So when he says an autocrat, it's your fault, that's true in a sense. The buck stops here. You should be controlling your boyars. But from the perspective of the Russian people at this time, it was a lot more. They're going to be blaming the nobles, they're going to be blaming the boyars, and they're going to have faith that if they can get their message to the Tsar will fix it. And that's important for what's coming.
The people hate me. What do I do? Ooh, I know. Why don't we find a weak and pathetic nation to go to war with? We'll win easily, and everyone will love me again. Why don't we just try treating the people better? As luck would have it, an opportunity for war was forming in the Far East. Russia wanted to expand its sphere of influence into northern China, and coincidentally, so did Japan. But Japan didn't really want war, so they proposed an idea to reduce the tension. Hey man, we'll let you do your thing in Manchuria if you let us do our thing in Korea. I don't think so. We've got the largest army in the world. What do you have? I'm the Emperor of Japan. I have a giant mecha suit. Whoa. Cool. Nicholas and the boys didn't see Japan as a threat, so they felt they could push Japan around. But little did they know Japan had been rapidly militarized, and when they launched a surprise attack on a Russian fleet at Port Arthur, everyone was shocked. Nicholas hoped it was an opportunity to win a quick war and regain the support of the people. Nobody seriously thought a puny Asian country could defeat a European superpower, and the Russian people were filled with patriotic spunk.
Yeah, if you want to get the people on your side, give them a common enemy. Unite them with a common enemy. Tried and true tactic.
Hey everyone, we're at war with Japan. Hey everyone, we're losing the war.
They
the
lose.
Japanese won. An embarrassing.
And it's not even close. Japan doesn't win. They literally knock them out of the ballpark. I think that's a pretty good image right there. It's a staggering defeat. If you want more detail on that, go to The Dumbest Russian Voyage Nobody Talked About by Blue Jay, which I covered very early in my channel career. I got a video on that. The Battle of Tsushima Strait, which was pretty much in-game for Russia. Russia just loses thousands to Japan's hundreds. It's not even close. And it's just an ultimate humiliation for Russia. Up until this point, Europe is dominating Asia, and Russia tries to get involved and they get their butts handed to them. There's no nice way of saying it. It's not even a close fight.
Defeat for Tsar Nicholas. Russia had enough problems, but now it had been internationally humiliated.
Oh,
the
yeah.
people were outraged. Unrest increased. Nicholas needed snuggles now more than ever. The tension was rising rapidly, and Russia was on the verge of revolution.
The 1905 revolution.
One disaster to push it over the edge, and that disaster would come in January 1905 from an unlikely source, a handsome Orthodox priest named Father Gapon.
Yep.
Father Gapon was leading workers and their families to the Winter Palace, but this wasn't some violent uprising. It was a peaceful protest. They wanted to deliver a petition to Nicholas, which simply asked for more freedom and better working conditions. The protest was actually so peaceful and respectful that the Marxists thought it was a big waste of time. Hey, Nicholas, some priest is leading a peaceful protest.
Let's stop here real quick, because this is something I prepared for, because I want to share some stuff specifically about Father Gapon, this particular protest, peaceful protest. For starters, the petition they're talking about is a type of petition called a chelobitnaya. I believe that's right, chelobitnaya petition. And it literally means beating one's forehead, chelobitnaya. And what it is it's a petition to the Tsar to redress issues. And it relates directly back to what I was talking about earlier with the Batyushka Tsar, the little father Tsar, and the whole Tsar Horoshi Boyartsi Ploka. I tried to make that an R to Plok, yeah. The Tsar is good, the boyars are bad. You had a right to make a chelobitnaya petition and take it straight to the Tsar. It was a normal thing. Now, with that said, this was not a normal situation. And this often gets misportrayed a bit for several reasons. For one, yes, it was a peaceful protest. Father Gapon is approaching the Winter Palace with a group of peaceful protesters in order to petition the Tsar directly. Now, what they don't tell you a lot of the time, including in this video, is that this peaceful protest had thousands of people involved. So it's not a small group, it's a huge mob. I've heard numbers upwards of 10,000. I don't know if that's accurate, but it was in the thousands. It was well over 1,000 in any case. So that's one thing you don't necessarily get out of some of these simplified versions of this. Another thing is that this is a period of unrest. The palace guards have been put on high alert. The military had been called in to keep angry mobs away from the palace because of all the unrest going on at this time. So bringing that big of a group of people toward the palace, and they were told you cannot approach. Had Father Gapon brought a smaller group of just a handful of supporters along with himself, things might have gone a little differently. But bringing this huge mob at a time when they were expecting trouble and they had a military presence ready to deal with this trouble, it's a powder keg. Now, there's some other complications that nobody knows about at this time. Well, I don't want to say nobody knows about, the people involved know about, but really won't come out until later, and that is that Father Gapon is being funded by revolutionaries. And More to the point, those revolutionaries are being funded by the Imperial Japanese Navy at a time when Russia's at war with Japan. So Father Gapon, a lot of the funds he's getting to stage this protest is coming indirectly from Japan. So that's not going to be a good look in the aftermath of this. And that's something they almost never talk about, is that even though this was a peaceful protest, it was being supported by revolutionaries and being indirectly supported by the people Russia was at war with at this time. So there's a lot more going on here than you see on the surface. Now, just for fun, I printed out a couple of specific passages from the petition, the chelobitnaya petition that Father Gapon was bringing to the Tsar. And I thought we'd read a couple of these real quick just for some understanding of what the peasants, or the Father Gapon and the workers and the peasants were asking for, directly from Nicholas. So, here is three paragraphs, just to give you a rough idea. Sire, we workers of St. Petersburg, our wives and children, and our helpless old parent have come to you, O sovereign, to seek truth and protection. We are beggars, oppressed and burdened with work beyond our strength. We are insulted, despised, treated as slaves who must suffer their bitter fate in silence. We have borne this, but we are being driven ever deeper into poverty, lawlessness, and ignorance. All right, and then a little later it goes on. We have no strength left, O sovereign. The limit of our patience is reached. The terrible moment has come for us when death is better than continuing unbearable suffering. And so we have stopped work and told our masters that we will not go back to it until they satisfy our demands. We have only two roads, either to freedom and happiness or to the grave. So they start out very polite. They present their state. They're being very polite to the Tsar, O sovereign, O sire, O our lord, that kind of language. But they're also giving him kind of an ultimatum. We only see two roads forward. Either we get freedom and happiness, or we'd rather die. And then finally, they also continue with something like along these lines. Do not refuse to help your people. Take from us the heavy yoke of endless oppression, poverty, and ignorance. Destroy the wall that separates you from your people. That's a big one. And that wall is represented by many things, but given the general attitudes and beliefs of this time, that's going to refer to some degree to the nobility and the boyars. These people are in between you and us. Let us treat directly. Let us talk to you directly, as it has been our tradition for hundreds of years. Take a direct hand. Don't go to the intermediary. But also, just understand us. Step down from where you are and look at us as we are. And, they're trying to get empathy from him, and they're trying to get intervention from him. Let the people rule the country with you. Command and swear to us that our request will be fulfilled, and that Russia will be happy and glorious. And your name will shine forever in our hearts, in our children, and in our grandchildren. So that's a couple of the paragraphs from that petition. It should give you an idea of what Father Gapon was asking, and help give you a better perspective of how the people Father Gapon was representing saw themselves and saw their relationship to the Tsar.
Here they want to give you a petition. A peaceful petitioning priest? I better get out of here.
He was already
gone.
gone.
Left the Winter Palace days earlier,
right.
And in his place, they brought in a truckload of troops, ordered to stop Father Gapon from reaching the palace.
They were ordered to protect the palace from angry mobs. But this was a time when, like I said, there's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of concerns over uprisings. And here comes Father Gapon with thousands of people in his wake.
Hello, good sir, and long live the Tsar. Please, allow me to pass this simple petition to our dear father, Nicholas II. Good day to you too. Please, allow us to respond by opening fire. What began as a peaceful protest ended in tragedy. Imperial soldiers opened fire on the crowd. Around 200 civilians died, 800 more were wounded.
Yeah, so see right there, it tells you how many were actually there. 200 killed, 800 wounded. You know, a lot of them were neither, so it's a huge, huge crowd approaching the palace. It's no wonder this happened. Bringing that many at once was probably a mistake. Certainly bringing them that close to the palace would have been a mistake.
All they wanted was the opportunity to ask Nicholas to improve their lives. Instead, they were met with bullets.
Yep.
Nicholas didn't personally order the troops to fire, but as an autocrat, he got the blame.
Yeah. And just a little twist of irony here. Among all those striking workers were the vast majority of St. Petersburg's media, their newspaper men, workers. So the next day, the newspapers were all shut down because all the workers had been in this protest. And as a result, they missed an opportunity to publish Gapon's petition to get the word out to the people. Here's what we were protesting. So in a way, the protest, by bringing along the newspaper workers, kind of shot themselves in the foot, because they could have used the press, because the press was involved in this strike, to get word out. This is our petition. This is what we asked the Tsar. Look what happened. Instead, the newspapers were all closed down that day. I think there were 2 still open, if I remember right. But a vast majority of all the newsletters were shut down that day because all the news workers were on strike as part of this protest. So that's a little bitter twist of irony. They could have spun this a little more against the Tsar quickly, and they could have published, for example, the petition, which would have got the word out for what they were asking for and made their plight more sympathetic.
The event became known as Bloody Sunday, and Nicholas's reputation plummeted. Strikes erupted across the empire. Workers' demands increased. Liberals demanded political power. Peasants demanded land. The country was out of control, and the 1905 revolution had begun. Listen, Nicholas, peasants seizing my land and murdering my family I can tolerate, but illegally chopping my wood? That's obscene! And the worse I treat my workers, the more they strike. I don't get it. Everyone relax. As long as the military is still on my side, there's nothing to worry about. Sir, the sailors are starting to mutiny. Well, my life just sucks. With Russia still losing to the Japanese, unrest was growing in the military, and some sailors had even taken to killing officers. Having the people against you was bad enough, but if the military joined in, it would be game over. To make matters worse, in October, workers and Marxists, including one Leon Trotsky, began setting up local elected councils called Soviets that coordinated strikes and supplied the workers.
Soviets were kind of, at this time at least especially, were kind of, think of them like labor unions. They were there to represent the workers, to organize strikes and that kind of thing.
See the writing on the wall. Things were going south fast, and he needed a big idea to save the Tsar. And luckily, he had just that. You see, all these angry people from different parts of society weren't really working together, meaning there was a weakness to exploit. Sergei wrote a manifesto that would give the liberals an elected assembly called the Duma. It took some convincing, but eventually, Nicholas agreed to share power and have his laws approved by an elected assembly. Hey liberals, here's your stupid manifesto. Happy now? We certainly are. But what about these guys? Aren't you gonna give them what they want? Oh, goodness no. I was just going to kill them. With the liberals satisfied, and after ending the war with Japan, the Tsar brought thousands of troops home, who then dismantled the Soviets, arrested their leaders, and crushed the peasant uprisings in the countryside. And how about that pesky parliament Nicholas had agreed to share power with? Well, he then wrote a bunch of new laws, which basically said, hey, remember that manifesto I wrote and how you guys were going to approve my laws? Slight change of plan. Actually, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want, and you guys are going to shut up. What? The people won't stand for this. People? What people? You know.
Yeah, that's kind of how it played out. Now, the Duma was not really that effective in the first place. I don't remember all the details, but I'm pretty sure they had the ability to propose things, but they really didn't have the ability to enact. That was all on Nicholas. So they really were kind of just a formality more than anything else. They really had no real power. And Nicholas made sure they understood that pretty quickly. But this isn't unusual during this time period. You've been seeing this happen throughout Europe for quite a while now, where a lot of the monarchs are being forced to share power with parliaments or other governing bodies. And to some degree, this has already been in case in Russia between the Tsar and the boyars. But this is a little different. This is a more formalized thing.
This is why people don't like you. And just like that, Nicholas had survived the 1905 revolution. But wait, a revolution? In Russia? Where was Lenin? Well,
Not there.
Lenin and his communist pals were still in exile. He tried desperately to radicalize the uprising, but all he could do was watch. As the movements failed to organize, the liberals sold out the poor, and the Tsar outplayed the people. Furious, he believed Russia had missed a great chance for a real revolution.
Yep.
From now on, he felt the only way left was an armed revolution by the workers. Watching the events of 1905 unfold, Lenin learned a lot. The Tsar, however, would prove to have learned nothing.
And that's a big deal. Lenin learns from missed opportunities. He learns from his mistakes. I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about his personality. Lenin could compromise if he needed to. It wasn't common, and certainly not in debate. But if he saw that he needed to change things to further the end of his revolution, he would do it. So he was capable of learning from what's going on, from what's happened, what he sees going on, and from what he sees is probably going to happen. So he's a learner. He's willing to change things if he needs to, as long as it's furthering his goals. Nicholas never learns. He just keeps making mistakes over and over.
After the 1905 revolution had failed, the Tsar's new top man was Pyotr Stolypin, and he had big ideas to prevent any more chaos.
This guy's
Step
not
one,
good.
Reform agriculture. This'll make the peasants love you. And step
No,
two,
it won't.
We'll kill anyone who doesn't. To
Yeah.
discourage any more revolutionary ideas, Stolypin began to crack down even harder on the Tsar's
Yes, he
opponents,
did.
and thousands were sentenced to death.
Stolypin's
The news even earned
necktie.
himself a new nickname. Stolypin's necktie. I don't get it. Oh, I see. Because it goes around my neck. That's so funny. But despite the oppression, many positive reforms were also being made, and the Russian economy even began to improve. This was a problem for Lenin. If the people weren't suffering, then they wouldn't support a revolution. Still in exile and lacking funds, the Bolsheviks simply weren't in a position to do anything. Luckily, it was around this time that Lenin met an incredibly handsome Georgian with your second favorite historical mustache, Joseph Stalin. Lenin and Stalin met at a communist convention in Finland, and Lenin liked Stalin because he was a real go-getter and was great at fundraising for the Bolsheviks. And by fundraising, I mean kidnapping, robbing, extorting, bribing, ransoming, assassinating, prison breaking, stealing, bank raiding, executioning, and stealing again. Hey Stalin, the Mensheviks aren't so hot in all this stealing, but we still need money. So the next time you do a big heist, just do it quietly.
Yeah, keep in mind that the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, they're both from one party that is split. So they're kind of, at this point anyway, still kind of together, but not. So, yeah, Lenin is got to be careful about what his faction is doing because it can cause problems.
Okay, quietly. Got it. If this isn't quiet, I don't know what is. Stalin's wacky antics eventually got him exiled to Siberia, but he had established himself as a big balls Bolshevik. However, no amount of Bolshevik balls could stop what was happening. The Russian economy was making a recovery. For the Tsar, things were looking up. This is great. All Nicholas has to do is sit back and not mess anything up. Hey everyone, big news. I'd like to introduce you to my new best friend. He's a crazy, drunken, beardy, horny, scandal-ridden magic wizard man, and he smells like a goat. We're screwed. Rasputin, a dirt-poor peasant from dirt-poor nowhere. But unlike all the other dirt-poor peasants, Rasputin had holy healing powers. And when this holy mystic wandered into St. Petersburg, people began to notice. He quickly became famous, and word of this mystery man and his healing hands made its way to the royal palace. The appearance of a holy homeless healer was of great interest to the Tsar and his wife. As far as royals go, they weren't that inbred, but they were just inbred enough for their son Alexei to get hemophilia. Or in layman's terms, Mamma mia, that's a lot of blood. Knowing Rasputin could heal.
So, hemophilia is the inability of the blood to clot. So if you get even a slight cut, it'll just keep bleeding. So you can literally bleed to death or get badly infected or both from minor cuts and scrapes. So you got to be extremely careful. And this is a genetic trait. It's been passed down through the royal line of Europe, through the line of Queen Victoria. A lot of her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, so on down the line, had hemophilia to some degree or the other. And Alexei gets it to his mother, who is a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. And also, I believe Nicholas was actually like a second cousin or something like that to his wife. There's just so much inbreeding going on, but especially the descendants of Queen Victoria hemophilia is passing down through that line. And like I said, the mother of Alexei is the granddaughter of Victoria. Excuse me.
People. In 1906, Alexander asked for Rasputin to come and see if he could cure their son. And crazy as it sounds, Rasputin did heal Alexei, possibly by taking him off his doctor-prescribed aspirin, having seemingly done.
Why would that make a difference? Because aspirin is a blood thinner. Not good if you're a hemophiliac. You don't want your blood to flow faster when you can't clot.
The impossible. Rasputin became very, very close to the royal family. But having a crazy homeless wizard man hanging around wasn't a good look for the Tsar, because Rasputin was freaky. Not only was he a big fan of alcohol, but he'd also throw these crazy parties with Russian nobility, where he'd and all night long, and then he'd his whole head hypnotic eyes, and nobody knew how the goat got on the road. Initially, the press were banned from talking about Rasputin, but eventually, the ban was lifted, and the tabloids went to town. The whole thing was a huge scandal, and everyone was freaked out that this guy was influencing the Tsar and his wife. Nicholas could have spent this period of relative peace improving his image. Instead, he spent it doing this. But as weird as the whole Rasputin thing was, so long as the economy continued to improve and the people's lives kept getting better, maybe Nick would be okay. Maybe there would be no more revolutions. Maybe this video could even end right here. Or maybe things were about to get worse.
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot worse.
Yep.
You see, the year is 1914.
Yep,
and that
World
means
War I.
It's time for World War I.
Yep. If you haven't seen my reaction to Oversimplified World War I, Part 1 and Part 2, now would be a good time to go watch that, so it can set up for Part 2 of the Russian Revolution. Even just watch it on Oversimplified for that matter, but it will help put in context some of what's about to happen here in Russia, leading to the February and the October revolutions. Anyway, thank you for joining me. I hope I came across kind of clear on Lenin. Like I said, it's a very complicated topic because it's so hotly debated. For 100 years, that his personality, his philosophies, his beliefs, a lot of that has been debated. Some parts haven't. I don't think anybody's arguing that he wasn't a vicious debater. He was very definitely a vicious debater. But some of that other stuff, there's a lot of debate over just what kind of person he was. The main thing I can say is he appears to have been obsessive compulsive, at least in terms of his revolution, and that he was not very empathetic. He was much more of a rational, reasonable person who put the end goal ahead of, or let's say, he put the end goal ahead of whatever's going to be in the way of that. So if he has to execute people, he's going to execute them. If he has to let people suffer, he's going to let them suffer, as long as it eventually gets him to this communist utopia that he envisions. So, he can be a problematical person to discuss, because he's kind of hard to paint into a box. He's a lot more nuanced than just all of this or all of that. Anyway, I said enough about that already. Let's just call this a day, and I'll see you back for Part 2 tomorrow. Thank you for joining me. Paka paka.